There are a lot of preflop scenarios that even professional coaches don't know how to play correctly because they're not thinking about rake. Now, in low stakes games, the rake is actually the single most important factor in all of your preflop decisions, and all of your ranges should be altered based on the type of rake that you are playing in. For example, if you're playing in a live low stakes casino game, the rake is very high compared to the blinds, so you need to be playing much more tightly. When you are playing in a 5-10 live game with a timed rake, the rake has almost no influence on the pot, so you should be playing much more game theoretically optimal. So I wanted to first look at an example of some pre-flop hand charts that are recommended for low-stakes players, live players, and I wanted to take a look at how these ranges actually performed when you take rake into consideration. So most people, including myself, don't want to spend the more than $1,000 for Piosolver Ultra or Pro or whatever the Piosolver version is that has pre-flop access, or they don't want to spend whatever the 5K is for Monk or Solver. I don't really know what these pre-flop solvers charge, but I have found that there are some kind of methodologies that you can use to see if your pre-flop calling strategy is profitable. So first off, we're going down here to include rake, which is going to be very important because if we're going to be thinking about rake, we need to make sure that we are appropriately modeling it into our game. So we're going to have a 10% rake with a cap of $5 in a 1-2 game. So as you can see in this scenario, we've opened to $8 in the cutoff with 25% of hands, and then here on the dealer button, our opponent defends with this loose range. So hopefully, 25% is loose enough to use this loose range, which looks like this. I'm not exactly sure how this range was chosen because just from the looks of it, it looks kind of strange and erratic to me. I don't know why 9-7 is a 3-bet, but then 8-6 is. There doesn't really seem to be any kind of notion of mixing your strategy here, but this is just a very, very basic ABC kind of range, but it's also pretty bad in terms of its profitability. So first off, let's go ahead and just put in, let's say, ace of king and a 8. That seems reasonable. Or a 7. Let's do a 7. 7. Give me a 7. There we go. And I'm going to go ahead and build a tree. So in this scenario, again, 25% of hands versus about 13% of hands that are condensed, as in there's less hands, but capped, as in they don't have aces, kings, queens, ace, king, etc. Right? So you can immediately be individualized. This is a wider range. This is a smaller range. This is uncapped. This is capped. Okay. So right now you can see that with an initial starting pot, we are beginning to solve down. And this is eventually going to solve down to something similar to this. It's right on an ace king 7 board. We expect the preflop raiser with the aces and kings and ace king to be crushing this board, so he's going to have a much higher EV. But the first thing I want you to notice here is that, wow, out of a $19 pot, this is not even making $16. Right, so this is one of the first things I noticed. I was just like, wow, as the cold caller, man, on this board, you're going to lose a lot of money if your opponent is playing pretty reasonably, or I mean, in this case, if you're both playing optimally, right? But if you both are playing reasonably, you'll make something similar to this, right? Your opponent's going to have about 2/3 of the share of the pot. So I was wondering then, what boards are we actually going to show a profit on as the cold caller? And so, as you can probably see from this pre-flop example, we don't have 5-4, we don't have 4-3, so a lot of the boards that are going to have like low straight possibilities, low 2-pair, are going to be more favorable for this defender, right? So when the board comes very low, you should be able to steal it a lot more often. And indeed, when we go and look, we'll see that the EVs are actually almost going to be inverse. The out-of-position player is going to have like $5, and the in-position player is going to have $10. But most importantly is that both players combined don't make $16. Why is that important? Let's go ahead and take a look at some Excel spreadsheets. So I've gone ahead and modeled, a bunch of different flop textures, as you can see, on a 25% versus a 14% board out of a $19 pot. Okay, so these are what all of the EVs are going to be for the out-of-position player. These are all the EVs for the in-position player. And then these are the average EVs of their EVs combined. The average of their EVs combined. And this is the average of each of those columns, right? So as you can see, in general, if you are the if you are the out-of-position player and you get called by, this kind of range and position, you are going to show a very, very slight profit. And when I say a slight profit, it's because, remember, you put in $8 originally, right? So if you get $8.36 back, you're winning 36 cents, right? If you and your opponent are both playing optimally using these ranges. However, notice that if you are the in-position player, across all of these boards on average, you are going to lose a pretty significant amount of money, right? You're going to lose about 73 cents. Remember, out of a $2 blind, right? So out of 100 hands, this is actually going to be a 36.5 big blind per 100 loss across almost like all board textures. Obviously, I've only just picked a handful of board, just a small smattering of board textures, and it's not really representative of everything, but I'm sure that as you begin to expand this list, as you begin to solve hundreds and hundreds of boards, if you use a script or if you just have a lot of time on your hands, you will see that this EV of the in-position player is just never going to average above $8. So in these high rake games, very often when you are playing wide versus wide ranges, if you are going to be calling, you're just going to get crushed a lot and you're just going to kind of be spewing money to the casino. So that's just really important that when you are developing your cold calling strategy, you kind of make this test and say, hey, look, am I cold calling in spots where I'm genuinely showing a profit, or am I really just donating to the casino? Okay. So I did the same kind of solution for the tight ranges. So as you can see in this infographic here, there's a tight and there's a loose player. So versus a tight player, you raise, and this is what the dealer should do. Okay. So if we look at these EVs, well, it seems that we are doing a little bit better, at least, right? The out of position player is now losing money across, this selection of boards, and then the in position player is making money in position of boards. But still, he's only making 44 cents, right, out of $2. But still, that's like a fifth of a blind, right? That means it's like going to be like $50 or 50 BB per 100. So that is a very significant gain. However, when you look closely at what the actual range these guys suggest looks like, this range means that you always flat ace king, you always flat queens, you always flat jacks, you always flat ace queen suited. The only hands that you actually 3-bet against this quote-unquote tight player is aces, kings, and ace 5. So on the surface, it's like, oh wow, this seems to be a very, very slightly profitable play. But also, it doesn't take into account that when you look at the opponent's 3-betting strategy, you're probably just giving up huge amounts of EV by not 3-betting hands like ace-king, queens, and ace-queen suited consistently against a variety of player types. And as you can see, right, like against all type players, you just never 3-bet any of those hands. And I think that even against a tight player, you should be 3-betting queens 100% of the time. So when you look at this range, right, there's this artifact where it is a profitable range, but the actual construction of the 3-betting range is leaving so much to be desired, right? So there's always just going to be this balancing act between, are you 3-betting enough hands for value and kind of maximizing your 3-betting value and bluff strategy, and at the same time, are you developing a cold calling strategy that is resistant enough to the rake that you are not going to be just spewing, right, like 36.5 big blinds out of 100 here, which is a gigantic disadvantage. So the first thing that you should be noting is that a lot of coaches simply aren't talking about rake. Okay, so if at any time you are looking at pre-flop suggestions or pre-flop charts that do not take rake into account, those charts are probably not using the same kind of modern software that we have available to be doing that kind of analysis. So, for example, the way that you should be playing 5-10 live and 1-2 live against the exact same player pool should be different because of the rake structure. That is something that is extremely, extremely important to think about. And I've definitely seen a lot of YouTube videos where top players say, oh, because of the rake I should be 3-betting here, and in situations that I definitely agree with, but I don't think that they go into enough detail of how much you actually are losing in many spots when you are cold calling openers, even in position, even with ranges as tight as 14% versus 25%, right? This is a range that is almost half of my opponent's, but because I'm so capped, gosh, I'm just still going to be losing so much money. In this situation, again, my range is very close to my opponent, but I'm so uncapped because I'm flatting ace, king, and queens here. So the only hands that I don't have are the 12 combos of aces and kings. So, this is... this shows that essentially one of the only ways that you can get this to be profitable is if you just start flatting so many monsters that your 3-betting range becomes a little predictable, right? I think if you're only 3-betting aces, kings, and I think ace 5 suited, you just don't really inspire much fear into your opponents because they can just overfold against you very, very confidently. So, make sure that you are thinking about rake in your own games. I know that might be a little nebulous unless you have a lot of charts and data in front of you to be able to run this similar analysis, but at the same time, just be extremely wary of any coach that is giving you pre-flop advice and they are not talking about rake, because if that is the case, it's highly likely that those guys are not talking about the right ranges. Good luck, everyone. Like and subscribe. I hit stop on Piosolver. That doesn't do anything for the video.